Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. I don't like the long layoff. It's just been too long since we've spoken. Thursday to Tuesday, we had the long weekend. I've lost my rhythm. I don't even know what to do. I'm going to ask you guys this. What's been better? The All-Star weekend or the Four Nations face-off? What have you guys been enjoying more?
When was All-Star weekend?
You just passed, Dave. Same weekend as your anniversary.
What do you mean my anniversary?
When's your
anniversary is in November.
Oh, Valentine's Day. That's right. You were going out for Valentine's Day. I forgot. The tequila.
What a disaster that was. What a disaster the starts of the show is. The hockey was better. I didn't even know it was All-Star weekend. I really didn't. Really didn't.
Hockey was better. I would agree.
What Four Nations?
I know the answer to this. I've been watching. Dave, what Four Nations are in the hockey?
USA, Canada, Sweden, and I want to say France.
Yeah.
France is what I'm going to say.
You got the letter right. It's Finland. USA,
I knew
Canada.
it was Finland. Oh,
USA,
so
Canada,
close.
Thursday final. Very excited.
Same freaking part of the world.
Three fights in 9 seconds. That was wild. Anyway, welcome to Fantasy Football Today, everybody. We'll go through some quick news and notes. We have 12 players on our do not draft list. 4 from Jamey, 4 from Dave, 4 from Heath. News and notes real quick. The Bengals, according to Sports Illustrated, plan to franchise tag T. Higgins. Remember, you can use the franchise tag just to buy yourself some time to come into a long-term agreement or make a trade. But he was franchise tagged last year as well, so that's an option for the Bengals. We've got a lot of, moving pieces at quarterback. We got Matthew Stafford trade rumblings. We've got Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer saying that many are connecting the dots between Kirk Cousins and the Cleveland Browns. Aaron Rodgers is not going to be on the Jets. We don't even know if he's going to play this year, but the Jets are going to release him. The Raiders are not going to bring back Gardner Minshew. The Steelers, we saw a report that they were going to decide either between Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. So some veteran quarterbacks are going to be out there. I may have missed one. Going to be an interesting year, especially for those top 3 teams. How sold are they on Shadur Sanders or Cam Ward? Cleveland, Tennessee, and the Giants, or are they going to dip into the veteran quarterback pool and maybe skip a quarterback in round 1? The Dolphins released Raheem Mostert, and Detroit offensive coordinator John Morton, new offensive coordinator, said that the offense will be predicated on Jared Goff. And I'm just, I don't think we need to spend much time on that. But Jamey, give me your thoughts on the T. Higgins situation.
I mean, it's exciting that he's going to stay with Joe Burrow, so unless he was going to or still can end up with a premier quarterback and be the one, because he's not going to be the one with the Bengals, he'll be the 1A. You saw what he's capable of when he's healthy, over the course of his tenure with the Bengals, Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow together. It's still very encouraging for his career and his production and his fantasy value. So he could still be a top 10 fantasy receiver. I think he's more of a top 15 guy, but someone that you'll probably look to draft in round 3.
Look at this, Heath. I'm just going to promote FFT Dynasty, but I'm going to get Louise to do it in our chat. Louise says, February 17th, which was yesterday, needs to be a national holiday, National Trading Day. There were 7 trades in his Dynasty League yesterday, and it was a national holiday. How about that? Have you ever seen 7 trades in one day in a Dynasty League?
Yes, but not a random day in February. No, I've seen that happen like during the middle of a rookie draft. But that's a good league if in the middle of February you've got 7 different trades happening.
And make sure you check out FFT Dynasty. Oh, tell us what's coming up this week.
It's in just about an hour and 15 minutes. I will have Scott Boulanger, a.k.a. Jax Falcone, a.k.a. Dino Game Theory, on discussing his anatomy of a top 12. He looks at who the current top 12 at each position are and what traits they shared as prospects. And we'll talk a little bit about my new top 12. I've got my top 12 rankings coming out this week on the site.
Excellent. FFT Dynasty. It's in its own feed if you want to, well, not on YouTube, but its own audio feed. Fantasy Football Today Dynasty on YouTube. You can see it all at youtube.com/Fantasy Football Today. You can see all of our shows there. All right. So we've got our do not draft list. This doesn't mean never under any circumstances are we drafting these guys. It's kind of based on what we expect ADP to be. Players that probably just aren't going to be on our teams. Jamey's got a whole big list of old guys. You each gave me 3 very extensive lists. I took 4 names from each list. So here's Jamey's list. I want to know if Heath or Dave disagree with these names. James Conner is going to be 30 years old in May. He was RB 11 overall and RB 15 per game. And he had 2 injured games, would have been a top 12 running back per game if you remove the 2 injured games for James Conner. So Conner, Mike Evans, who was 11th per game in PPR, 6th per game in non-PPR. Mike Evans. Devontae Adams, who was 12th per game in full PPR, 13th per game in non-PPR. And Travis Kelce, tight end. Actually, this is kind of interesting, the difference between full and non-PPR for Kelce. 12th per game in non-PPR, 7th per game in full PPR, because he only had 3 touchdowns, but did have 97 catches. So it's James Conner, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, and Travis Kelce. Any disagreement on this from Heath or Dave?
I think this is a good time to add the caveat that, like, we don't actually know what ADP is going to be, and I would draft any player we're going to talk about at the right cost.
Okay. Sorry, Heath. Go.
No. So, like, I mean, if we could maybe for reference talk about where they were drafted in the drafts we've done so far.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly where I was going.
Like the one in particular that we've seen fall a lot, I feel like, is Travis Kelce, because people don't know for sure if he's going to play. If people are going to draft him as the 7th or 8th highest tight end after round 6 or 7, then I'm probably still fine with that.
Okay, so I'll give you where they went. James Conner round 3, James Conner round 6. James Conner round 6. Mike Evans round 3. 12-team PPR, by the way. Devontae Adams round 6. Travis Kelce round 8. So in order, it was Evans round 3, Adams in round 6, Conner a little bit later in round 6, Kelce in round 8. How about Jamey? Do you, at those prices, would you be in on any of those 4?
Probably all but Evans.
Okay. So you thought it was fair for them to be round 6.
And this was without
rookies. If you're getting these caliber of players in this spot, I just don't think that's going to be realistic. Maybe outside of Kelce, depending on when we're, considering these drafts, because I think Heath nailed it. But you also have Adams. The uncertainty. I think once he ends up with the team, he will not be a round 6 pick.
Okay, and he was just at the beginning of round 6. All right, so anybody more bullish on these guys?
I want to see where Devontae Adams ends up, and if he's got the opportunity to get double-digit targets per game like he's done. Last year he did it, and the year before in Vegas after Josh McDaniels got fired, he had that. It'll be a little inconsistent, but I could see myself going with Adams as a round 5-ish type of settle for wide receiver.
Could Adams and Rodgers, Adams, I guess, back 2 and Rodgers for the first time go to Vegas?
I'd be very surprised if they brought Adams back.
I don't know their cap situation either. And if they can do that, because it'll be expensive for Adams. It won't be for Rodgers, I think. I think Rodgers, the tab on Rodgers is being paid for by the Jets this year. So Rodgers kind of gets to pick where he wants to go, and Adams could follow him, or Adams could go to New Orleans and try it again with Derek Carr.
The Raiders have the second most cap space.
That helps their cause for sure.
$95 million.
So all of these guys, except for Kelce, had good years. James Conner, 4.6 yards per carry, very good advanced metrics. Again, he would have been a top 10 running back per game, if not for the 2 games he left early. I don't really know if he has a lot of competition. I mean, we like Benson as a name. He didn't really do much. He didn't really have much of an opportunity. He's basically a workhorse who was on pace. If you remove the injured games, he was on pace for 50 catches and 1,765 total yards. And it's 2 years in a row now where he's been really good and really efficient for the Cardinals. Evans, top 12 wide receiver again, although definitely much, much better after Chris Godwin got hurt, but Godwin's coming back from a serious injury. Adams.
If he's back at all.
Yep. Adams, top 12 wide receiver per game. It just barely. On pace for 171 targets. On pace for 176 targets with the Jets. He had a better statistical season than he did in 2023 when a lot of his metrics were pretty crummy, but still, like, you could see he's not the same player he used to be. Kelce Kelce, it's so obvious right in front of our faces. We can see he's just not the same player he used to be. But yeah, where are we on the other guys? Where are we on all of them, Heath?
Well, I was just going to say, like, even the Kelsey one, he was much closer to tight end 4 than he was to tight end 8. Like, with 3 touchdowns, he was 1.5 per game better than Mark Andrews and Sam Laporta. So I think there's a pretty good case that if he plays next year, he could be better than he was this year. But Evans in particular, I was really high on this past year. And it kind of seems like from our early drafts that people might be about where I was on him last year now, and I will be out if that's the case.
Does it bother you that 27% of his PPR total came from touchdowns?
Sounds a lot like Mike Evans.
Well, if you just look at the difference between Evans and Kelsey, Evans still gets so many end zone targets, and that's actually gone away for Travis Kelsey. He has 12 end zone targets in his last 2 seasons combined. In 2022, he had 10. And another thing that really concerns me is, like, look at how bad he was. He averaged 4 targets per game the first 3 games of the year when Rashee Rice was healthy. And then toward the end of the year, when Xavier Worthy started taking over, Kelsey wasn't really that good. So when they're both on the field, yikes. And what do? They bring back Marquise Brown? I don't know. So I don't think anyone's going to argue with Kelsey in round 8 or 9, round 8, where he went in this last draft. But, Jamey, of the 4, who are you concerned about just completely falling off a cliff and being basically useless, if any of them?
Useless?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's going to be completely useless. The one that probably concerns me the most, assuming Kelsey plays, because clearly that's the biggest detractor for him right now, is probably Connor, just because of his age and his position. I know we got, sort of, I don't want to say lucky, but we got away with, these guys having very productive years at their ages, Connor and Jones, and obviously Derrick Henry in particular, as they, either turn 30 during the season, or in the case of Henry, turn 31 at the end of the season. It just doesn't happen year over year for these guys. And so at some point, Father Time is going to catch up to them. And in the case of the receivers, I think Heath has a great working theory of, when they start to show you that they're declining is really the time to buy into them declining. Bill Belichick also has a pretty good theory as well that, you want to get out a year before it's, a problem. And, so I was probably 50-50 on some of these guys across the board, between the older players, because I'm probably the biggest ageist that we have. And look bad on some of these guys, obviously, in the case of how they finished. Evans missed 4 games last year. At what point does that hamstring injury pop up again and it becomes a bigger problem? Devontae Adams got sort of rescued going back to Aaron Rodgers. If he has, another quarterback change, another system change, he's not the focal point of the offense. How much worse does he start to look at his age? So they're all concerning to me. I don't think they're all going to just completely be terrible. I think we'll have some half a season maybe of quality production and half a season of why did I draft these guys. I don't think we're getting like DeAndre Hopkins out of these guys, those type of performances, or hopefully not Cooper Kupp, where there's injuries and then just poor performance.
Is there anybody on this show that could see a path to taking any of these 4 older players with a top 50 pick?
I think Evans is definitely going in the first 50.
Would you take him with the top 50?
Oh, I'm not. No. I shouldn't say that. I think round 4 is an okay spot to buy into Evans, depending on what happens with Godwin. Because if they bring back Godwin and then McMillan's still a factor, and then you factor in age, like we're starting to see maybe what we saw at the beginning of last season when they were working in some other guys, and Evans just wasn't as productive to start the year.
Yeah,
he was still good. He just wasn't elite.
If he's there at the 4-5 turn, I'm going to do a dance of joy. It won't be, but yes.
And I can see based on ADP, because we know how people still get nostalgic for names. Like if Adams, Dave, you brought up I think 2 scenarios over the course of the last couple of weeks. One being Green Bay, one being New Orleans. So going back to the Packers and maybe being their number 1 guy there is, you sort of suggested, and then New Orleans makes some sense because they have, a need for receivers and the car connection. So if either of those 2 situations where he's walking in as the number 1 guy, because he would be in those 2 cases, then I think people get overexcited and overdrafted.
Right. But I don't know if I would take Devontae in that round 4 range. In either.
I'm not saying you would. I think people would. I'm not saying you.
Right. But my question was asking my fellow countrymen here on the show about whether or not they would do it. And maybe I'll end up taking Mike Evans with the top 48 pick after all. Maybe Heath's right that like that round 4 or 5 turn is a good place to get him. And obviously, if Devontae Adams ends up in a good spot, that's going to be the same exact range. I will end up falling in love for James Conner as a round 5 pick, just to be that settle for RB2. He's had at least 15 PPR points per game 4 straight seasons. I don't think he should. I would have to go back and watch, and maybe Adam, you can jog my memory. I don't know if he showed that like he's slowing down as a player, and that's just all about touchdowns for him. I think he can still contribute if he's in that position where he can be the main running back for Arizona, whose offensive line I think will get better this offseason.
Connor spent a lot of his career behind some of the worst offensive lines in football. The end of his Pittsburgh tenure, the beginning of his Arizona tenure, and it was a little bit better just according to PFF and just according to PFF last year. He is not an explosive player. Now, we have a metric on True Media called explosive run rate, and it's runs of 12 or more yards. And he actually ranks pretty high in that. But I think that if you want to use the word explosive, I don't really view 12 yard. It's all whatever you want. It's subjective, right? If you want to talk about like 30-yard carries, he don't get a lot of those. He's not running away from people. He hasn't been for either of the last 2 seasons, but he's a productive running back who doesn't have a lot of bad carries. He moves his balls forward, he stays ahead of the sticks, that kind of player.
Gets touchdowns.
Gets touchdowns. He's on the field a lot. So in that regard, I wouldn't call him an explosive player. He's not making a lot of big plays, but he's also, not making a lot of negative plays.
I do think, though, you're selling him you're talking about him like a plotter.
No,
he had a 53-yard carry last year. He had a 44-yard carry the year before. He's averaged YPC for life 4.7 yards per carry over the last 3 seasons.
I'm very complimentary of him. I'm not selling him short. I'm just saying he's not a guy who has a lot of long runs. He doesn't do that very often. If he had 2 runs last year, more than 20 yards. I could be wrong about that. 2 or 3.
I'll check. I'm on it right now.
Yeah, I might be confusing him with J.K. Dobbins because I was looking up his stats on him because we're going to talk about him later. We have to take a break. Sorry. Take a break. I want to come back and just talk about wide receiver age in a moment. We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today.
We dig it. Do you? The Pro Volleyball Federation on CBS and streaming live on Paramount Plus.
James Conner had 2 carries longer than 23 yards last year on 236 carries.
6 carries of 20-plus yards.
No, well, he had 4 carries of 20 to 23 yards. He had 2 really long carries. That's all I'm saying. I don't want to nitpick too much. He ain't Jahmyr Gibbs. I think we can all agree on that.
I think you've done a really good job of illustrating, when you're having this type of discussion, it matters so much where you're setting the line at. We use True Media for a lot of things. They have something called explosive run rate.
You think a 13-yard run is an explosive run?
I don't have a stat called explosive run rate.
I'm just
our stat provider does, and that's how they classify it. And you're not even saying a round number like 20 because he had too many 20 and 21 and 22-yard runs.
It's not that many.
We're going to use this ridiculous number of 23 yards or longer.
That's not what I'm doing.
No, you specifically said that you chose that number because he had carries of 20 to 21 or 22.
No, Dave asked me if he had slowed down or whatever. I was just giving context on the kind of rusher that James Conner is, and you're nitpicking and picking apart everything I say, which is
I'm not at all.
And I'm just saying he's not someone that has a whole bunch of big plays. He's not a big play guy. He's very productive running back in his own way, but he's not a super fast guy who's running away from people. Who would disagree with that? That's exactly what he is.
I was not nitpicking you. I'm saying that when we talk about stats, this is what we do. We choose our own line to make our own point.
I'm just not making a point about him. I'm not criticizing him. I'm not saying, do you think he's an explosive player who's, creating big plays all the time?
No, but he's not a plotter either.
No, I never said he was.
And ultimately, he gets the job done. He's top 10, or at least last year, he was top 10 in success rate among qualifying running backs. That means that he would either convert first downs or take a 1st and 10 play and get half the yardage needed. Same thing with the 2nd down play. He was good. He was functional. And as long as he's getting the same amount of opportunity this year as he got last year, and he avoids getting hurt, it's really easy to buy into James Conner with a round 5 pick. And then if you want to back him up with Trey Benson, that's not going to be expensive either. I think it's a decent strategy to keep in mind if you go receiver heavy with your first 4 picks.
All right. Speaking of receivers, Evans and Adams are both going to be 32 years old this year. Adams already is 32 years old. He turned 32 on Christmas Eve. That really does seem to be like the kind of a fall off the cliff type of year. And we just saw DeAndre Hopkins and Keenan Allen play in their age 32 seasons. There are some really good age 32 seasons, but I think going back, you could find a big difference between age 31 and age 32. Look at Keenan Allen, look at Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne, Andre Johnson. These guys were great at 31. I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think they were necessarily great at 32. So this is worthy of Julio Jones, another guy, worthy of more research, but 32 is a dangerous year, and Adams and Evans are both going to be 32.
Is it 32 or is it 10 years of playing football and then your body's starting to wear down?
Yes.
All right, Dave, let's hear from you. Let's hear your do not draft list. You've got DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, George Pickens, and Anthony Richardson.
Not the sexy high-profile names that Jamey gave, but still players that I'm going to hesitate taking. Who do you want to talk about first?
Well, I meant to go through it and see where they were drafted, but I messed that up. So Swift was round 6. Dobbins was 3 picks earlier.
Oy.
Oh, Anthony Richardson was right in between them. Okay, this is the stretch in round 6. Dobbins, Tyrone Tracy, Anthony Richardson, James Conner, DeAndre Swift. Heath took Swift. And then who else did we have? We had George Pickens. Pickens was in round 4, late round 4. And Richardson, I already said, was in round 6. So you have Richardson and Swift and Dobbins in round 6, and George Pickens with the 47th pick, late round 4.
Again, who do you want me to start with?
Well, how about Jamey and Heath? Any disagreements here?
I mean, I drafted Pickens, so depending on who they add, that will change that. But I was very happy to take him at the spot that I took him.
I think there's a really good case to be made for why DeAndre Swift is going to have a breakout year this year.
Yes.
And there's a really good case to be made for why DeAndre Swift is going to get replaced by a plodder like James Conner this year. I took him in round 6. I absolutely love that value. I think there's huge upside in round 6. If he gets into the round 3 range, I'm going to be out.
Yeah.
All right, Dave, go ahead. Your thoughts?
I don't know what I would do if DeAndre Swift made it into round 3. The rest of the Bears depth chart must be like ghosts if that's going to happen. Last time that he was paired up with Ben Johnson, it was in Detroit. They had a season together. It was 2022. He did average 13.7 PPR points per game. That is not round 3 worthy. I'd say that's round 5, 6 worthy. But he only had 5 games with 15-plus PPR points, including 2 in the last 2 weeks of the season. This was the year that Jamal Williams had 17 touchdowns. So 2 years ago, the new head coach of the Chicago Bears already felt like DeAndre Swift wasn't a full-time running back. In fact, he only had 3 games with 15 or more touches, 9 of 14 games with 10 or fewer touches. I would suspect that if he's even still on the Bears when the season starts, that would be the range that he would be in, is around 10, maybe 12 touches
But isn't
per
it
game.
a huge cost for them to move on from?
It might be. I'd have to double check that. But if it is a huge cost, okay. So if it is a huge cost, then I think we know what they want his role to be. Perfect world, they find another running back to come in and be a more physical guy. And this running back class is littered with those guys. So I don't think it's going to be Roschon Johnson. I think it'll be a rookie, and Swift and the rookie will split. And we know that this is an offense that is definitely under construction. The O-line needs a lot of help. They can dedicate themselves all they want to the run game, just like Detroit did, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be as successful as Detroit was. I don't know if DeAndre Swift can hold up And I don't know if we had the opportunity to see him do well this past season. And where did he end up? 12.6 PPR points per game. And he was even sharing then. So the age isn't an issue. He's 26. And we know that he's got some speed because he had some explosive plays last year. But I don't want to pencil him in as my RB2 if I can help it. Maybe a low end RB2. Just thinking about, well, are there really 23 or 24 other running backs that I'd rather have than Swift? And when I think about some of the rookies and where they could potentially end up, I think the answer to that question is yes. And so he definitely makes me nervous as somebody, maybe around 6, 7, somewhere in that range is the right spot. But I don't want to trust him as a starter on my fantasy team.
Well, he's always been bad in short yardage, and he had 6 carries from the 3-yard line or closer, and Swift scored 2 touchdowns, whereas Roschon Johnson had 8 carries from the 3-yard line or closer. And now I haven't looked if maybe Roschon Johnson's were all like at the 1. I don't know, but he scored 6 touchdowns. In fact, DeAndre Swift with those 6 carries from the 3 or closer, 4 of them were in one game. So he wasn't used as the goal line back last year. It's never been a strength of his. And he averaged only 15 carries per game, 14.9 carries per game in 17 games. This is a team. The Bears actually had the 5th most running back carries from the 3-yard line or closer. That's a great opportunity. And he scored only 6 touchdowns.
Are you judging his short yardage success or failures based on his touchdowns?
Well, he's always,
No, it should be on opportunities more than touchdowns.
Well, if one guy has 8 carries for 6 touchdowns and one guy has 6 carries for 2 touchdowns, then
right, exactly.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with you that he struggles there. I just wonder if he had gotten a lot of the tush-push touchdowns and he's converting those behind a very good offensive line, because last year he was doing behind a bad offensive line. So would the perception be different?
We all think, but I'm comparing him to Roschon Johnson on the same team.
No, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying.
You're going back 2 years to when he was in Philly and he lost all those
Would the perception be different if he had converted those touchdowns that were taken away from him because of the tush push?
It probably would be, but I think it's important to note that this is now, if we include Philadelphia and Chicago last year, 3 different coaching staffs that have viewed DeAndre Swift the way that Adam is suggesting that we view DeAndre Swift.
And it was Jacob who actually brought it to my attention during last offseason that Swift has been bad from short yardage. I'll just look from 2020 to 2024. I'll look at the third and fourth and 1 conversion rate, where he ranks. And he is 116th out of 128 running backs who have had 100 or more carries in that stretch. But if you want to be encouraged, the guy right in front of him is Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley has also been horrible in 3rd and 4th and 1 conversion rate. And so has Josh Jacobs. So maybe it doesn't really matter that much. But I just think he wasn't viewed as the goal line back. Dobbins. What's your beef with Dobbins, Dave?
He had 7 games last year with 15 or more PPR points. 6 came before he got hurt in week 12. We know what the deal is with J.K. Dobbins. If you're getting him late in drafts, awesome, because you know that he can help you get off to a good start. Maybe he can be like he was last year, where he carries you through the first, what do you think it was, like 3rd, maybe even half of the season as a starter for your fantasy team. And then once the wheels come off, you just move on to somebody else that's still a good value when you're taking him close to or in the double-digit rounds. We don't know what team he's going to play on. We don't know what type of situation he'll be in. This is not somebody that I'm ready to fall back in love with at this point.
So round 6 was too early for you there. Yeah. And then Jamey took Pickens 47th overall. Was that too early for you?
Again, another player who there are just way too many questions. And I think one of the questions is, will he be any team's number 1 wide receiver? Makes sense for the Steelers to keep him because of his contract. But if he's too big of a pain in the tuchus, then I think that they're going to consider moving on from him. And we don't know who his quarterback's going to be. If we go with my pie in the sky scenario of Rodgers and Adams going to Pittsburgh, then that's absolutely going to negate what George Pickens can do. He averaged over 7 targets per game last year, and he averaged 11.7 PPR points per game last year. And I was a guy that overrated him. I've overrated him 2 years in a row. And I love how he is as a downfield guy. He can, make unbelievable catches on those sideline footballs. And we saw him occasionally make great passes or great catches rather over the middle of the field. I don't know if he's got what it takes or if he'll be given the opportunity to be a number or to produce like a number 1 receiver for our purposes.
Heath, Anthony Richardson went in round 6. I think that's probably too early for everyone. The same manager then took Jordan Love 3 rounds later, who is another guy that's on your do not draft list. But do you see any validity to drafting Richardson, reaching for him, not round 6, but I don't know, round 8, and then, just playing under the depth of the position and having a really good backup?
Yeah, I think the Richardson Love pairing makes a lot of sense. I would draft Richardson before I drafted Love. I really don't want to draft either one of them in the single digit rounds. But if you're going with that approach, maybe it makes sense to reach around on Richardson, because he has shown us, even last year at times, the ability to score 30 plus fantasy points without even passing that well. He's working on his mechanics this offseason, trying to become a better passer, and that works sometimes.
Yeah. Last 5 games, he missed weeks 9 and 10. He got benched. Last 5 games, he was a roller coaster. 30 points against the Jets, 13 against the Lions. This is 6 point per passing touchdown. 25 at New England, 14 at Denver, 22 against Tennessee. I'm guessing that probably comes out to around 22 points. I don't know, but that would be like what Jared Goff averaged for the year. So that's with 5 rushing touchdowns and 4 passing touchdowns in those 5 games. There's so much upside there.
What round did I get Justin Herbert in our last mock?
Your third quarterback or your fourth?
Yeah, I think it was I don't think I took 4. I just took 3 because
round 13.
It was weird. Yeah, I'm taking Justin Herbert over Anthony Richardson in any round.
I guess maybe if I was in like a 14-team Superflex league, I would understand that. But I just don't see any upside for Justin Herbert.
I see tons of upside for Justin Herbert.
Yeah.
We saw it last year. He finished with 29.5 fantasy points per game in his last 3. We saw 22.7 in his last 11. Once Jim Harbaugh realized that his old school ground and pound style wasn't really the best plan for his offense, when Justin Herbert is his quarterback, we saw much better things. And that's a receiving core that can get better. And Justin Herbert's a guy who can actually complete more than 50% of his passes, which is something I'm not sure Anthony Richardson's going to do. I said this before. I don't remember if it was on main episode or FFT Express, but I think that I need to see Anthony Richardson. The reports have to be glowing about how he's throwing the football before I even consider him. There are too many other quarterbacks that have top 10 upside that you can draft late. Justin Herbert's one of them. Anthony Richardson isn't about to become one of these 30. He's not about to be what Lamar Jackson was, unless he just completely changes his game as a thrower. And I'm gonna have to be a believer in that.
Yeah, but let's just keep that in mind, everyone, that he is working with a new coach who's trying to get his mechanics right. It's the same guy who worked with Josh Allen. Mm-hmm. And I think we can all agree, if he does become a better passer, then we could have something pretty special here. So it's just something to remember going.
If they both hit their ceilings, Anthony Richardson's ceiling's higher than Justin Herbert's.
I think that's fair.
It's probably higher than almost every quarterback in fantasy.
Honestly. I think that's fair too.
Yeah. All right. You know what else is fair? Taking a break. So we're going to take a break, and we've got Heath just picking on one of the best teams in football on his do not draft list. We'll tell you who it is after this on FFT.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship. A 16 beats a 1. From sweet to elite to the Final Four.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So to recap, Jamey's do not draft list was James Conner, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Travis Kelce. Dave had DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, George Pickens, and Anthony Richardson. And Heath has Christian McCaffrey and 3 Detroit Lions, Jared Goff, Sam Laporta, and David Montgomery. And we'll take a look at where they went. McCaffrey was early in the second round. He was the 3rd pick of round 2. Jared Goff was the end of round 9. He was after Jordan Love, another player that was on Heath's do not draft list. I didn't include him for this show. David Montgomery was in round 4. So before a lot of those running backs that we talked about, like James Conner, way before them, 2 rounds before, Aaron Jones, James Conner, J.K. Dobbins, Tyrone Tracy, DeAndre Swift. And then who was the last one? Oh, Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta was the first pick of round 4. Okay. So Heath, why don't you start with McCaffrey and then we'll tackle the Lions.
Yeah, I mean, McCaffrey was the old running back that none of us were worried about going into last year that turned out to be the one that we should have been worried about. He has multiple lower leg injuries. He's going to be 29 years old, or may have already turned 29, but definitely will be at the start of next season. And I think he's still going to end up being a top 15 pick, most likely. I think you were calling him a great value because he fell into round 2.
Yeah, it was.
I think he may go in round 1, and I do not want to take that type of chance on a guy that I've not heard any sort of report that he's not going to have tendonitis in his Achilles anymore when he comes back. I think he's probably like the most likely outcome. The thing you should expect is that Christian McCaffrey is not Christian McCaffrey anymore.
Okay, when would you take? Is even a round 2 pick for you?
I round 2, 3 turn to be okay.
Anybody willing to take McCaffrey in round 1 other than me?
I can't do it.
I think as we discussed when we went over the mock draft, like when you get to the back end of round 1 and you're looking at the group that we saw this past draft, I may miss a name or two, but it was Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., all 4 of those receivers, I think were like pick 10 or later. And then it was McCaffrey, Henry. I don't remember there was a third running back in the mix there. If you feel like, okay,
Chan,
I'm okay with one of those receivers as my second pick, and I want to see if McCaffrey has what we hope is left in the tank to be a top 3 caliber player, number 1 overall player, number 1 running back, then you pull the trigger at that spot just to make sure you get him if you really want him. If not, you let it sort of play out the way Thomas did, which was he took Nico Collins, Thomas Schaefer. He took Nico Collins with the hope of taking another receiver there. McCaffrey felt him, and he kind of took the Robert Turbin theory of, I'm just going to take the best running back who still has the ability to be elite. And it worked out well for Robert because he drafted Saquon and Derrick Henry. Or at least he was high on Saquon and Derrick Henry in the league that we're in. You just have to have a belief that McCaffrey is going to be right. And so, yes, we haven't heard anything that he's not dealing with any issues. We haven't heard anything that he's not, suffered a setback as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's the difference between him and Barkley? Barkley a year ago, Barkley was very injury prone, and had trouble staying healthy. If you're going to say age, it's fine. It might be the only thing, but like Aaron Jones and James Conner, they just had very healthy, productive seasons.
Well, Barkley did play 14 games the year before, and he had played 16 the year before that. Like he'd had some injuries, but I'm worried that Christian McCaffrey at his age just had these injuries last year, and tendonitis is not something that I think generally just goes away.
This will be one where I want to hear from one of the but we'll get our medical guy on. All right. And we'll get Rudy on or Marty on, and we'll hear what he has to say. I'd like to hear what all the doctors have to say about McCaffrey. But all right, Heath is out on McCaffrey. Now, Jared Goff, David Montgomery, Sam Laporta, a trio of Lions, and you are, based on what you expect their cost to be, out.
Right. And you said that both Laporta and Montgomery went in round 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be way out for me. I think first off, I am going to be a little bit concerned that a team that was an insane outlier last year in terms of total volume of play and total volume of points scored, and just lost their offensive genius and replaced him with someone who was not like a protege who was just there running the same thing. I think that team might take a big step back offensively. Not that I think the Lions are going to be bad, but there's a big, you could be a good offense and lose a touchdown a game off what they did last year. And the other thing is Sam Laporta, his rookie year was fantastic and put him in that elite tier of being drafted in round 3 last year because he scored a bunch of touchdowns, not because he had an elite production in terms of efficiency. And then last year, he just didn't have as big of a role in the offense with Jamison Williams there. And now we've got a new coordinator. I don't know how he's going to distribute all of these touches. And I think Jahmyr Gibbs is obviously quite a bit better than David Montgomery, and there's a good chance with a new offensive coordinator they don't split the work up quite as much, especially with Montgomery now another year older.
Yeah. Montgomery, the first 13 games of the season, he got hurt in week 15, the 14th game, left early with an injury. He was a top 12 running back. He was 11th game in full PPR, and he actually had more carries than Jahmyr Gibbs. He had 2 fewer catches than Jahmyr Gibbs. They had almost the same amount of touches. But you think it will be more Gibbsy? Because we're kind of hoping for a more Gibbsy split this year, and it didn't really happen.
I could just be hoping it into existence, but that is what I'm hoping for. And I just think when you have a back as talent, like they're both, I've been a big David Montgomery fan for 4 years. I was arguing for him back when he was in Chicago. I'm not saying he's bad at all. He's not. I think he's better than Jamal Williams. But at 28, when Gibbs is just entering his prime, and a new offensive coordinator, I think it would make sense that you'd see a little bit of the work shift towards Gibbs.
32% of David Montgomery's PPR fantasy point total came from touchdowns. He scored 12 of them last year. He had 1 game with 15 plus PPR and no touchdowns. So if you're drafting David Montgomery, you're hoping that he still has that role of being an inside the 10 all the way up to the goal line touchdown scorer for the Lions. And that's an easy role for him. I could see him succeeding in that role. It's all the other stuff that he does that makes me nervous that he could be marginalized a little bit more, and that accentuates Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit more. I personally don't love what they did at offensive coordinator either. And I kind of smell what Heath's cooking here. And this is the Lions team. It's kind of easy to look at them and say, okay, different brain in charge now. Maybe they do take a step back.
And Goff, if you just think, I think people probably feel like Jared Goff had his best season, right? I mean, I don't know that he can do much better than what he did. He averaged 23 fantasy points per game in 6-point per pass touchdown leagues, 22.9. Dave might have a slightly different number, but around 23 points per game. To put that in perspective, Dak Prescott has averaged more than 24 points per game 4 times. And Goff didn't even do that last year, and Goff threw 37 touchdowns. That's because he ran for 56 yards. So now it's also because he barely threw the ball, right? I mean, he threw 31 times a game, 31.7 pass attempts per game. The previous 2 years, he was 34.5, 35.6. But I don't know. It just feels like I don't know that Goff can do any better. And he was QB 8 per game in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues, QB 7 per game in 4-point. Does anybody kind of feel that way? Like he peaked, he hit his ceiling last year?
Mostly. I mean, but I think also, you started the show with your news and notes saying that they're going to run the offense through him, which is, maybe taking a little bit more off of what David Montgomery per se does and giving a little bit more to what these elite pass catchers could be. I mean, you have first-round talent, Jameson Williams. You have what's proven to be an elite talent in Amon-Ra St. Brown. You have what could be an elite talent at tight end in Sam Laporta. And you still have, which I think is kind of the saving grace to all of this, is that they still have one of the best offensive lines. So, he's going to get a lot of protection. They may be in a lot more shootouts now because if the Vikings offense continues to develop, assuming that J.J. McCarthy is, picking up the mantle from Sam Darnold, which is strange to say, but, keeps that offense afloat. And the Packers take a little bit more step toward what they were in 2023 and get a little bit more explosive. And we have some shootouts there. And obviously the Bears are trending in the right direction. Then we could have a really fun division, depending on how the Lions defense looks, which is clearly what was a problem for them at the end of last season. So I think in terms of what these guys all have to offer, yes, you lose the brain trust, and that's a scary proposition. They're still all relatively young. They're still all relatively in their primes when you factor in the offensive line and Goff. And hopefully it just becomes, a smooth transition. There is clearly cause for concern, but I think if you're overvaluing Jared Goff, you're probably not playing this game the right way because of what you said. I'm like, he's not going to give you some bonus production. He's going to have to be a 40 to 45 touchdown type of guy, which he hasn't done yet. Like you said, it just kind of feels like he peaked. So 35 to 40 touchdowns is probably the best case scenario. Can he become a consistent? How many passing yards does he have this year?
Like 4,600.
Right. So can he take the next step? I don't think so. I think this is kind of like what he is. So 4,500 yards, 35 touchdowns. That's a great settle for quarterback. It's not someone that you go out and say I have to go and build my fantasy team around Jared Goff. He's going to win you fantasy championships because 23 points per game with an elite roster is great, but he's not going to be a Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen type of guy. And I don't think he's going to morph into that all of a sudden because of a change in system.
Third lowest ADOT in the NFL, Jared Goff. That was a little bit of a change for him, but also with the third lowest ADOT, he had the second most touchdown passes. Actually, the most touchdown passes of 50 or more yards, which is pretty surprising. But it kind of, you go back and you watch the 50-plus yard touchdown passes, you see the talent, right, of Jameson Williams, mostly Jameson Williams. Actually, fun stat, if you want to look at, go to 30 or more touchdowns of 30 or more yards and just the Jameson Williams plays.
Oh, yeah.
Jameson Williams gave Jared Goff an extra, I think, 2.2 fantasy points per game on his 5 touchdown catches of 30 or more yards. So that's part of the appeal of Goff, is like he's got these playmakers around him, as Jamey was saying. And Laporta can make big plays for a tight end, and St. Brown can get going too. So
I think just in the case of Laporta, if you look at what he started to do in the second half of the season, I think it was kind of a little right before Thanksgiving to the end of the year. Like, that was the guy that we were drafting at the start of the season. That was the guy that had his rookie dominant campaign. So can he pick up from that going into year 2? Now, part of that was Montgomery getting hurt. Part of that was, I think, right around the time Jameson Williams had the 2-game suspension too. So factor that into the equation. But I just think if you're taking Sam Laporta in round 4 in the draft that we did, you're taking him ahead of George Kittle, which was a mistake. Like, those things just don't feel like they should be happening. But if you're getting him round 6 still, I still think he's got top 5 upside.
okay, cool. That's it for our list here. Do not draft. What else we got, guys?
We're definitely sticking with that all the way through August, right?
Yeah.
No way we're changing these lists.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So what do we have coming up this week? We've got a free agency preview on Thursday, and then tomorrow is the best and worst second half performers. So I remember that's a fun show. Kind of look at some of the late season trends and whether or not we think they're going to hold up going into 2025. Thanks so much for watching, listening, everybody. Stay tuned for FFT Express after this, and we will talk to you tomorrow on Fantasy Football Today.